afternoon, everyone. I'm Megan Myers, Land Warfare Reporter at Defense One. Thank you for joining us for State of the Navy and Marine Corps. It's the first installment of our three-part State of Defense video series. It's also part of our larger State of Defense special report, which looks at the challenges and the opportunities shaping the year ahead. Today, we focus on the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. We'll start by talking with the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Eric Smith. But before we begin, a few quick reminders. In the chat box below the video player, you can request technical assistance, submit questions for our speakers, and engage with fellow attendees. This event is being recorded and will be available on demand shortly, allowing you to revisit key insights and share them with your colleagues. Here's General Smith. General Smith, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Megan.
So the Marine Corps is about halfway into the Force Design 2030 timeline. Can you give us some updates about milestones reached, highlights of the last year, and then what's on deck for the coming year?
Sure. The 3rd MLR, the 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment, did their Marine Corps Combat Readiness Evaluation and passed it with flying colors. So the 3rd MLR up and running. 12th MLR is in progress toward IOC. They've hit their initial operating capability, and they're on progress or on path to be full up and round in a timely manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that they did their stand-up ceremony the other day. Yeah,
they did.
Awesome. So is there anything else outside of the Marine Littoral Regiments that is coming up this year that you guys are looking forward to, or that's a little bit challenging?
Well, what I would say is we've got multiple priorities, and I'll go ahead and hit them now for you. My 5 priorities are balancing crisis response and modernization. Mm-hmm. That is wicked hard to do, mm-hmm. To modernize while still providing America the crisis response force that she has come to expect. Mm-hmm. And that means our RMUs, our Amphibious Ready Group Marine Expeditionary Units. Naval integration and organic mobility. Organic mobility means organic to us, to the U.S. Marine Corps, things that are available to us 24/7, 365. Quality of life. Our Marines have fought long and hard in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and frankly, our barracks took a hit. We prioritized warfighting and lethality over our barracks, and I won't apologize for that, because there's a lot of Marines walking around today with both limbs, both eyes, that otherwise would not have had them. Had we focused on barracks during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but those chickens have come home to roost, mm-hmm. and it's time to increase our quality of life. Other priority for me is recruit, make, and retain Marines. Mm-hmm. The most important piece being retain them, because I can recruit them all day long. Well, you actually can't recruit your way out of this crisis. You can only retain your way out of this. Yeah. And so we've got to be able to pay our Marines what they deserve, give them bonuses, give them job satisfaction, job security. And then, frankly, the final one is to maximize the potential of Marine Corps Forces Reserve, because we can't do this all on the backs of active component. You know, not where we are at 172,000. You know, we've got to be able to maximize our reserves, because you bring in that additional 35-ish thousand Marines, and that puts you over the hump. That gets you what you need. It gets you to be able to exercise on the southern border, to be able to execute missions in Guantanamo, to be able to execute missions for the combatant commanders. But Marine Corps Forces Reserve playing a huge, significant role, especially in SOUTHCOM. Mm-hmm.
So, keeping in mind, you know, there's kind of always this looming continuing resolution issue. How is funding kind of hemming up the timeline to be able to get all this stuff done by 2030? I mean, we're in 2025 now.
Yeah, a continuing resolution is really detrimental to our modernization efforts, because it has you spending at last year's mm-hmm. dollars. And so you can't do any new starts. And we're all about new starts. I mean, everything about force design is new. And so when you have a continuing resolution, again, you're pinned into last year's funding, doesn't take into account inflation, and it doesn't allow you to do new starts. Yeah. And yet the pay raises for our junior enlisted, those are happening. And so what you'll see is a bigger slice of the pie going to manpower. And what I can't, you know, foresee is we'll be the best looking outfit to ever get run off the hill, be the best paid outfit to ever get run off the hill. I mean, our young Marines deserve to be paid well, but again, we've got to fight and win America's battles. Mm-hmm. And to do that, you need equipment, you need training, and training is expensive.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything scheduled for this year that's kind of in danger of slipping if that funding doesn't come through now that we're going into budget season?
I would say everything is in danger of slipping. Aviation modernization, our Nemesis, our Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System, procurement of those missiles, procurement of our TPS-80 Gator radar, ground air task-oriented radar, modernization to that, landing ship medium, all that starts to slip when there's a continuing resolution.
So speaking of funding, you guys passed your audit for the second year in a row.
Second year in a row.
Only service to do so. There's a little bit of a mandate in this administration to get Pentagon spending under control. So what's the secret to passing an audit, do you think?
There's no secret to it. You have to be able to, you can't go back and recreate records that didn't exist in the first place. So Marines are kind of fanatical about when you check into a battalion and you go to supply, you're issued your backpack, your rucksack, you're issued a shelter half, 5 tent pins, 3 tent poles, and a guide wire, you know, and that's your shelter half. And at the end of your time in that battalion, when you check out, you're expected to turn in 1 shelter half, 5 tent pins, and 3 tent poles. And if you don't have them, you go buy them. Go out to, you know, Bob's surplus store and you buy them because you're accountable for them. And so it's just ruthless adherence to standards. You know, what you check in is what you check out. And that starting at boot camp where you don't misplace things. You know, your rank goes 1 inch up and centered. And if you take a measuring device now, my rank is 1 inch up and centered. I measure it every day. It's just ruthless adherence to standards. I mean, there's no secret to it, other than that's how we make Marines.
Do you think the Marine Corps size in terms of people and in terms of funding kind of helps with that? And can other organizations scale that same thing, or are they just simply too large?
No, we've still got a $50 billion a year budget. I mean, $50 billion a year. So, you know, once you get past 25 billion, then it's all kind of a wash. So whether you're 50 billion or 75 billion or 250 billion, it's about your accounting procedures. And you know, what goes into those accounting procedures and that ruthless adherence to discipline, that's what made us pass our audit 2 years in a row. And we'll pass it again next year too.
Have any of the other service chiefs hit you up for tips on how to pass their audit?
Yep.
Oh, good.
And what I offer them is, you know, we're Marines. It's what we do. But again, you can't go back and recreate records that don't exist. You just can't. If you didn't account for something when you received it, you can't go back and make up a record for it. You just can't.
So I wanted to pivot to amphib readiness and your kind of partnership with the Navy, because obviously you depend on them for that. In January, the Navy unveiled this plan that they hope will mean that they can get their ships into maintenance availabilities more often for less time, get them back out to sea more easily. How does a plan like that help you with ARG-MUs and getting them ready to go out and have a little bit more of a predictable schedule about when a ship's going to be ready?
Yeah, it's called OFRP, Optimized Fleet Response Plan. And the OFRP is a good, well-intentioned evolution. And so the Navy is attempting to get the ships in and out on time. But right now, that's not happening. The amphibs are going in and they're staying in. And a lot of it has to do with funding and prioritization of funding. But I'll also say, in the Navy's behalf, it also comes down to combatant commanders when they extend the MU. Or extended carrier strike group. I won't speak for Admiral Kilby. But in the case of the ARG-MUs, they are the most sought after item by the combatant commanders after carrier strike groups and submarines. When an ARG-MU gets extended, then the very, very tightly woven shipyard plan comes apart. And now there's something else at this dry dock, there's something else berthed at this pier, and this amphib was supposed to pull in. Well, there's another ship that's pulled in because we were 6 months delayed because we were extended on an ARG-MU by a combatant commander. So a lot of it comes down to balancing out, getting us back to a 3.0 ARG-MU presence so that there's always an amphibious ready group Marine Expeditionary Unit, 4 deployed off the East Coast, always 1 forward deployed off the West Coast, and there's always the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit doing 2 deployments a year, episodic deployments out of Okinawa, Japan. That's how you get back to the combatant commander doesn't have to choose to extend the ARG-MU because he knows there's another one coming heel to toe. That's what we really need is 7 ARG-MUs.
And has the Navy come to you to ask about how they can help that process go better? Some of the issue is that they just don't have the best inventory and the best plan when they get into the yard and things start coming up. Are they kind of working hand in hand with you to make sure that you've reported every issue that you've got so that the ship goes into the yard prepared?
Absolutely. Jim Kilby, again, the acting CNO, he and his team are asking us what we need. They're attempting to prioritize that. Frankly, there's really no shipbuilders left in America. Again, there's only a couple of yards you can pull into to do the maintenance. And so we're competing with the rest of the fleet. And so we have to have our place in it. And again, I would go back to the combatant commanders have to release the ARGMU on time. You can't keep extending it, because when you ride a horse hard and put it away wet, horse pulls up lame. You have to, it's the reverse Pony Express. The Pony Express only works because you get a new rider, or the same rider, new horse. What we're doing is the reverse Pony Express. New rider, same horse. New combatant commander, same ARGMU, getting extended, getting extended, getting extended. So we've got to get back to a 3.0 ARGMU presence.
And part of that, of course, is having enough amphibious assault ships, having enough amphibious ships in general to begin with. Last week, the potential Navy Secretary had his confirmation hearing, and a senator brought up that there's actually law that says that the Navy needs to have 31 amphibious ships, 10 of them need to be assault ships, and that hasn't been part of the shipbuilding plan. How is the Navy consulting you about what your needs are, about how many, and does 31 and 10 seem like the right fit?
Well, the Navy, we just had a meeting just today on amphib readiness and on ship availability, and it's completely open and transactional. We know, the Navy knows they have to maintain a minimum of 31 by law. It's really the readiness of those ships, and if we can't get the readiness up, into the 80 percentile range, then it's going to necessitate more ships. I mean, it just is, and I'm not making any news by saying that. I mean, it's just a supply and demand issue. Because what we need is 31 operationally available amphibs based on 80% readiness. And when the readiness is down in the 50 percentile, then 31 is not going to do it.
And what does that do for the Marines who are sitting, waiting to go on those deployments? Obviously, you train them up, and if they sit there, how does that readiness issue kind of throttle Marine readiness overall? It
hurts retention, because Marines sign up to deploy. They didn't sign up to sit in the barracks at Camp Lejeune or sit in the barracks at Camp Pendleton. They signed up to deploy. They want to go and see the world, so to speak. Even if you don't pull into a port, you're doing something. You're out there operating. You're in the Red Sea, knocking down Houthi drones. You're conducting a non-combatant evacuation operation, or you're conducting humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, or you're deterring China in the South China Sea. That's what they signed up to do. And so when they don't get to do that, then they vote with their feet and they'll get out. And manpower, again, is the one thing you can't buy back. Once it's gone, it's gone.
So I wanted to ask about this new administration has, put out some guidance saying we want you guys to take 8% of your budget and shift it from these older priorities from the previous administration toward more lethality, more readiness. What is that freeing up that money? What does that do to your priorities? How, not necessarily how would you spend that money, but is that a little bit of a shot in the arm that you guys can do some things, especially considering this CR environment, that you may have a little bit of money freed up to put toward your, the outstanding readiness issues that you've got?
Well, I would hope so. I would hope that, when the 8% cut drill comes around, that again, we're not the droids they're looking for, because we're passing an audit twice. We're good stewards of the tax money. Everything we do is about warfighting and lethality. That's all we know. That's who we are. And so any additional funding that we would get will go toward operational readiness and lethality. It'll go toward 155 rounds, 20 millimeter shells, hand grenades, machine gun ammo, flight hours, gasoline and spare parts for our F-35s, gasoline and spare parts for our CH-53 kilos. A tremendous platform. The 53K can lift all of itself, literally can lift itself and transport it and refuel and fly unassisted across the Pacific if it needs to. So we would hope we would do well in any additional dollars that come out. But again, we're here to take our cuts just like everybody else, and then we'll compete for the collective, and I think we'll do well. Because again, we've proven to be good stewards of the tax money. And we have again, the most sought after capability by the combatant commanders, after carrier strike groups, and ballistic missile submarines in the ARGMU.
So I want to circle back to the Force Design 2030 conversation again. Like I said, you're about halfway through this plan. 2030 is coming up pretty quick now, it feels like. What is sort of on the horizon for the Marine Corps reinventing itself in this way and moving a little bit away from Iraq, Afghanistan, and that role, and getting kind of back to the core, amphibious assault force that the Marine Corps was for so long?
Yeah, I think what you'll see is just a greater capacity. Most of the changes have already been undertaken. Most of our new equipment for our MLRs is already in progress. Our Nemesis, our Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System, is already there. It's just a matter of growing the missile inventory. Again, the TPS-80 Gator radar, the ground air task oriented radar, it's already there. It's just growing the capacity. It's the reorganization piece and then allowing them to train as an MLR. But what's really critical to them is their mobility, their organic mobility. The landing ship medium is vital. It's a piece we have to be able to move throughout the littorals, especially given the lack of amphibious shipping. We have to have the landing ship medium, and I think we have a good pathway to get there.
So I want to go back to a couple of your the priorities that you laid out in the beginning, especially, you said you can't recruit your way out of this issue, that you're looking at better retention for the Marine Corps. I mean, the Marine Corps is pretty well known for, one enlistment. That's pretty standard. How do you think that you can, turn that around and get Marines to stay in longer?
Well, I think what we're doing is they like what they're doing. We're also giving them more of a say in where they go and what they do. What we used to do is say, again, I think I said this, when you were assigned to Camp Pendleton, you do 3 years and you move to Camp Lejeune. Well, I want to stay at Camp Pendleton. My spouse has a good job in California. Nope, you got to move. Well, now, if you let a guy write his own tasking statement, he'll get it right 100% of the time. So now the monitors, the detailers, we call them monitors, Navy calls them detailers, but the assignments officers are asking you, where do you want to go next? Let you write your own orders. Because if you let people write their own orders, again, there's just as many people that want to be in Okinawa as there are that want to be at Camp Pendleton, that want to be at Camp Lejeune, that want to be in New River, people that want to be at Yuma. Let them write their own tasking statement and let them stay somewhere, because then they can build equity in a house, their spouse can have employment, their kids can go through school. It doesn't make you a better Marine just because you move from coast to coast or you go overseas or you come back. I mean, our job is the same regardless of where you are. It's to be ready to fight tonight. And so a lot of it is just allowing a Marine to have some ownership of their career. We used to tell people, hey, you want to re-enlist? Sorry, wait your turn. Now, you want to re-enlist today? Okay, boom, re-enlist today. We don't have to go through the rigmarole. You're a Tier 1 Marine, first class PFT, no non-judicial punishment, meet your height weight standards, you've completed all your professional military education. You want to re-enlist today? We'll re-enlist you today. As opposed to, well, put in your package, stand in line, we'll come back and we'll let you know. I mean, the Marines commander said this Marine needs to be re-enlisted. That's what we pay commanders for. I trust them. And so the Marine gets to re-enlist on the spot. It's an automatic re-enlistment.
You talked a little bit about how Marines really want to deploy and that could be a retention issue. What are those deployments going to be looking like, especially with Force Design 2030 in mind? Yeah,
there's still going to be deployments. I mean, whether you're with an MLR or whether you're with a MEU, you're still going to be out for 6 months at a time. The MLRs may be out for less than 6 months at a time, depending on where you go from. But ideally, we're still deploying to Southcom, we're deploying to the Westpac, we're deploying to EUCOM. Even if you just deploy for 30 or 60 days to Norway to do an exercise. I mean, I remember when I was a midshipman, I wasn't even a lieutenant yet. I watched, I think it was a NPR special on Lieutenant Ernie Manicotti. I'll never forget his name. He was in Norway training with his Marines out of 2nd Marine Regiment. And I thought, wow, I'm from Texas, I don't like the cold, but I wanted to do that. And so, I've gotten to do cold weather training now. So Marines they just want to do what they signed up to do. They didn't sign up to sit around the barracks. They signed up to deploy.
And what does that look like in the Indo-PACOM area? As far as Marine presence, things shifting around, obviously Marines moving from Japan to Guam, what is that going to look like in the future?
Other opportunities to train and with the extant units in Japan. We do Fuji Viper, we do Cobra Gold in Thailand, we do Common Dog and Cooling Dog in the Philippines, and in Australia we do Pitch Black in Australia. I mean, the Marines want to be deployed, and we have lots of allies and friends, lots of partners in the region. and we'll continue to exercise with those allies and partners. We just have to have the ability to get there. And we can only just self-deploy ourselves on our C-130s so much, and then we break the wings off the C-130s. Fly the wings off of them, not break the wings off of them. Poorly said. But we will fly the wings off our C-130s.
Is there a way to kind of bridge that gap with technology, and instead of having to just make those flights all the time? Is there any way to do some of that? Working with allies, or gathering information, gathering intelligence from farther away?
Well, you can. There's a saying: virtual presence is actual absence. So what I know is you must be present to win. If you're going to train with the Aussies, you got to train with the Aussies. You can have a CPX, a command post exercise, where you talk about how you'll interoperate, and that's okay for a guy like me, for a guy like Colonel Middendorf or a regimental commander, but the Marines have to operate next to an Aussie. They got to operate next to a Filmar, a Filipino Marine. They got to operate next to a Japanese ground self-defense force soldier. They have to operate next to a Korean Marine. They have to actually say kapshi kapshida, together we go in Korean. And so the Marines actually have to interoperate. And the command post exercise is good for the leaders, but it's not good for the young enlisted Marines.
Are there more opportunities in the pipeline for that? Are there more discussions about having more opportunities?
I would say the opportunities continue at pace. Again, the exercises are year after year in the Indo-PACOM. They're kind of, I won't say rinse, wash, and repeat, because every year we get better and we get better. And Admiral Paparo depends on those Marines to be able to exercise in Commandant and Coolandag and Pitch Black and Cope North. And so we'll continue to deploy our aircraft, deploy our Marines, and continue to train. And we just, every year you want to go one better. But we also have to remember that every year we turn over young Marines. And in the case of the Koreans and the Japanese, they turn over more frequently than the Filipinos. They turn over more frequently than we do. Some of them turn over every year. So you're starting again at ground level, and it's hard to build that repetition, which is why those exercise plans are so important and why they're annual, because you got to retrain the Korean Marines or train with the Korean Marines every year, because again, they're very much a 1 year and then you're done.
Yeah. So what else is on deck for this year? What are some of the things that you are looking forward to, some of the challenges that you're asked to mount this year?
Well, what I would say the biggest challenge we have is we've got to make our recruiting numbers again, because it all starts and ends with manpower. And then the MLRs, we've got to press the go pedal on the MLRs. We got to get them full operational capable. We got to expand our magazine of Nemesis. We got to get a couple of our newer programs in. Some of our ground-based air defense system, GBAD, we've got to get those things built. We got to get them on contract, and we got to get them in the hands of the warfighter, so we get a real air defense system, so we get a real naval strike capability. We just have to improve and increase our magazine, and then we got to keep our Marines sharp. We got to keep them deploying, because again, the one thing you can't buy back is manpower.
You mentioned recruiting. I mean, usually the rap is that the Marine Corps has the easiest time, but it sounds like the struggles are going all the way down.
Oh yeah, we don't have an easy time in recruiting. I'm a former recruiter. Again, I think I said my son's a recruiter now. We make mission because we require our Marines to make mission, because we don't fail. We put our best and brightest on recruiting duty, and we reward them for successful completion, and we relieve them when they don't make their mission. So we don't have an easier time of it. We just work harder. I mean, it's a fact. If you go by a strip mall, which we don't like, but if you go by a strip mall and you see all the recruiting stations set up together, the other services and us, you're probably going to see the lights on in the Marine Corps recruiting office longer. And that is not me taking a ding at the other services, because I don't want the other service chiefs mad at me. We're just different. We don't fail. And I'm asked that, hey, how are you guys making your mission every year? We're Marines. We don't know how to fail.
All right, that's fantastic. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you about that you want to make sure to mention?
What I would say is force design is moving at pace. It was always designed to be flexible, was always designed as a campaign of learning. We call it the COLAG, the Campaign of Learning Audit Group, which runs out of Quantico underneath the auspices of CD&I, Combat Development Integration. And we are constantly looking and making minor adjustments. I mean, it's just like a machine gun. You you make, or a mortar, you bubble up and you make minor adjustments. You bubble up and you make minor adjustments. But we're on the right path, and we're going to continue that path to get the Marine Corps modernized. Because again, if we don't, we're going to be the best looking outfit to ever get run off a hill by the PRC. And that's not going to happen on my watch.
All right, thank you so much for being with us, General Smith.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm going to hand it off now to my colleague, Jennifer Ladd. For Defense One, I'm Megan Myers.
Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer Ladd, Managing Editor for Defense One, and I'm excited to continue the discussion with our next conversation titled Operating in the Littorals. The Marine Corps is engaged in a multi-year modernization initiative aimed at enhancing its amphibious capabilities and preparing for potential conflicts into the Indo-Pacific, particularly with China. A significant aspect of this transformation is the increased emphasis on the littoral zone, which includes the establishment of Marine littoral regiments and the integration of advanced technologies specifically designed for operations in shallow coastal waters. I'm honored to welcome our guests, Lieutenant General Roger Turner, Commander of 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force, and Major General Christian Wertman, Commander of 3rd Marine Division. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you joining us here from Okinawa. To start off, I'd like to get a brief overview of your priorities for Marines in the Indo-Pacific theater.
Great, Jennifer, thanks, and it really is an honor to be joining today, and so thank you very much on behalf of all the Marines and sailors in 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force. It really is an honor to be here. But as you know well, we are gathering at a time of a really intense changes to the strategic landscape, and we are seeing increasing speed and increasing complexity to those challenges. And as you all know well, we have seen continual increase of the Chinese Communist Party's aggression in the region, and that has our full attention out here in 3MEF. 3MEF is really uniquely postured in the Western Pacific to be able to project world-class naval expeditionary forces using our traditional methods of amphibious forcible entry from the sea. But thanks to our modernization efforts, we are now postured to be able to project combat power from the land into the maritime, into the air, into space, and into cyberspace. And that with the purpose of creating tactical and operational dilemmas for potential adversaries. As we like to talk about it, really is that there's really two key operational advantages we think we have over potential adversaries. The first is our ability to leverage partners and allies. And we have seen our partners and allies in the region very thirsty for our security cooperation and exercising. And we have seen those partner and allied nations continue to be more committed based on the changes in the strategic environment they see. But we see that our ability to leverage partners and allies to create real dilemmas as one of our key operational advantages. And the second one being is that the contributions of the stand-in forces, or the forces that are already positioned in the first island chain, their ability to create those strategic and tactical dilemmas for the adversary, we see those really being some of our key contributions. And then lastly, right, we are campaigning out here to deter. That is our focus, is to do that. But if deterrence fails, that we are fully prepared to fight and win against any adversary. So with that, I look forward to the discussion ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. And I'll just add to Lieutenant General Turner's thanks. Really appreciate the opportunity to share with you the story of the work that's being done by our Marines and sailors in the first island chain and back in Hawaii with 3rd MLR. Our priorities are pretty straightforward and easy. We are aligned to support the 3MEF campaigning objectives. General Turner highlighted a couple of key points, but we support deterrence across the AOR by delivering warfighting readiness and lethality, and being known to provide warfighting readiness and lethality. We also work hard every day through our campaigning activities to build advantage over time, really in the interest of deterrence. But if we've got to transition to a posture that we need to fight from, we need to have conditions set to be able to do that quickly and smoothly. Important to note, I think that 3rd Marine Division, in a lot of ways, has been ground zero for service innovation and modernization with the fielding of the 2 Marine Littoral Regiments, or MLRs that you mentioned in your opening. But I'd like to emphasize what has not changed, either with the MLRs or the rest of the division. And it's that our formations continue to be built on combined arms and small unit excellence. They're enabled by Marine initiative, judgment, and high standards at every echelon of the command. And we remain a hard-hitting ground combat element that's part of the 3 MEF Marine Air Ground Task Force and an expeditionary force in readiness. So a lot of change, a lot of modernization and innovation to be ready for the environment that General Turner provided, but it's built on the ethos and values that have defined our institution and produced excellence, warfighting excellence for the service for centuries. Thanks very much. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you both. So I'm probably going to touch on a lot of the different things that you've mentioned, but I wanted to start with China. So many military experts agree that China is aiming for a 2027 deadline to have its military modernized and ready for combat. And the Pentagon's China Military Power Report released in December notes that the Chinese investment in their military and its rapidly increasing readiness and proficiency, it's kind of speeding up. 2027 is not too far away. So how is the Marine Corps preparing for that, for 2027 and also beyond? Okay.
Jennifer, I'll take the first crack at that question, and then I'll pass it over to General Workman for other comments. But as you describe, I think the first thing when we start talking about 2027 is to remember is it really is not our formulation, right? This is a formulation of the Chinese Communist Party, who has enunciated that timeline as the period that they want their military to be ready to conduct operations to reunify Taiwan. So that's really their construct. And I think our challenge is how do we meet that challenge? And so that really is what we're focused on. And that kind of ties together our modernization efforts, but also our day-to-day efforts in campaigning and training and exercise as we and our partners prepare for such an eventuality. I think first would be that as I described, really is our ability to leverage our partners and allies, and that's something that we've seen really exponentially increase over the last several years. And we look at some of the changes that the Japanese have made in their policy and what they are doing in defense, and then what the other nations in the Pacific are also doing as they see this. As they see this threat that is being imposed by the Chinese Communist Party. So that's really what we're focused on. So I think an example would be we just did exercise Iron Fist this last week, and we just are kind of moving towards conclusion. An example would be is that 3 or 4 years ago that exercise was done in California, and so our Japanese partners would go to California. So now that exercise has been moved into Japan, and it's an exercise that the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Brigade and the 31st MEU do, and in an intense bilateral exercise, and it actually operates in the area where it's intended to be used in Japan, Okinawa, and the areas around this. And I think that's just evidence for kind of the increasing pace of our ability to leverage our partners and allies against potential adversaries, and how we're really manifesting that in our campaigning and our ability to achieve deterrence. And then I think the second piece would be is that just the utility of our amphibious forces and really what that gives us. So recently, we have had very good success with the 31st MEU and the amphibious readiness in the what the Navy calls the Forward Deployed Naval Forces Japan. or FD&F. And thanks to the efforts of our partners from Admiral Kacher and Admiral Stone and others here, we have seen in the last 2 patrols really good success with our amphibious readiness, which has allowed us to really improve the capabilities that the 31st MEU provides. But I think importantly, with that said, is that some of the difficulties we've had with amphibious readiness across the force also has been detracting from our capabilities, in that we normally would be receiving a MEU from the West Coast as well, and we would be able to integrate one MEF into our campaigning more effectively, but that's been hampered by the lack of capacity and the lack of sustainment of the amphibious fleet. But those are just a couple of examples of things that are on our mind out here. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Thanks very much. I would just say 2027, is interesting for us, but we feel the imperative every day to be ready, like today. And whether it's a crisis that is initiated by the PRC and the Chinese Communist Party, it's a crisis on the Korean Peninsula, or something that naturally occurs in the Western Pacific. Our senior leadership certainly, and I think our fellow citizens, have an expectation that Marines are going to be ready to deploy quickly. The whole mindset of maintaining an expeditionary force in readiness, most ready when the nation is least ready, and lessons of history, lots of potential for accidental or unintended escalation. So our imperative is to be ready today. And that sort of pours fuel on the intensity that the Marines bring to building readiness and lethality. I suppose at the service level, the story starts with studying the operating environment and studying the adversary and engineering capabilities that create dilemmas for our adversary. Kind of a maneuver warfare mindset that is associated with our modernization in our innovation efforts. And we work to bring that to the tactical and operational level as well. And just kind of guided by the MEF's campaigning objectives to be able to position ourselves so that we maintain advantage in the environment, and we are recognized as being able to gain and maintain that advantage. And I would say if there's one thing that has our most intense focus, it's building small unit leaders of excellence and building small units of excellence. If we can deliver hard-hitting companies and battalions to the fight, they're going to find a way to secure our interests and objectives. So we really spend the bulk of our attention there. Thanks.
Thank you. So that actually I was going to maybe jump over to amphibious ship availability because you mentioned it, General Turner, but talking about small units and small unit leadership, which is, kind of an always Marine Corps thing, it leads me to a different question that I had, which is about force design. So Marine Corps started restructuring effort in 2019, Force Design 2030. So we're now 5 years into it. And I'm interested in what capabilities and capacity does the Marine Corps have now that it didn't have previously, but also what are some of the things that haven't changed? So I'm guessing like the small unit leadership focus is one of those things that hasn't changed. But if you guys could talk about, if you gentlemen could talk about those things that we have now that didn't have, and then maybe the things that are still priorities.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. When we started this journey, as you described back in 2019, right? We were really, singularly focused on the ability to project forces from the sea to the land, and then the ability to operate landward at scale, which we demonstrated in Desert Storm, and we demonstrated in Iraq and Afghanistan, and most of us kind of grew up in that environment. As we started to contemplate the future operating environment and the potential adversaries that we've been discussing, we recognized the need for also to have the ability to project power from the land to the sea and into the air and into other domains that we hadn't really traditionally focused on. So this was a massive paradigm shift for the service, and it's been an exciting journey, really, as we learned how to operate in new domains. And then as General Wortman mentioned, right, just to watch the incredible innovation of our young Marines and sailors as they work to solve these problems that were outside of some of the traditional focus areas of the Marine Corps, but they still applied that same rigor, that same passion, and that same initiative that really has been the hallmark of the Marine Corps to a new problem set. And I believe that we are now postured to create those real dilemmas for adversaries in domains that we traditionally have not been part of, while at the same time still being able to deliver our traditional capabilities. So it's been, for us, I think, an incredible journey and super exciting.
Jennifer, if I could just add a couple of comments. From my perspective, what's unique and really powerful about the MLRs is their ability to sense, conduct command and control, and then provide lethal effects across all domains. They just have the ability to maneuver and provide those lethal effects in the air, maritime, land, and cognitive domains in ways that are unique and sort of right at the cutting edge of operational capability. They also sort of help us to unlock the full potential of our Marines, their ability to exercise their initiative and judgment. In terms of some specifics on capabilities, first I want to note that this week we activated the 12th Littoral Combat Team, which is one of the 3 battalions in the 12th Marine Littoral Regiment. And they're the ground combat power of the MLR, designed to conduct reconnaissance and counter-reconnaissance, seize key terrain with combined arms capability, and support sea control. And I want to note and acknowledge 12th Littoral Combat Team will carry the proud colors of 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, and we're really honored by that responsibility. A couple of other systems or capabilities that I think are worth highlighting. Over the course of the last 6 or 9 months, we fielded the Nemesis and MATIS systems, so the Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System and the Marine Air Defense Integrated System. These provide us lethality and capability for the air and maritime domains that previously just did not exist in the ground combat element. We've got more fielding programmed, but in both of these capability areas, we've taken a really substantial step forward. Nemesis provides us the capability to conduct maritime strike, and it builds to the capability to deliver the full MLRS or multiple launch rocket system family of munitions. So really powerful across domains. And then MATIS provides a short-range air defense and counter-UAS capabilities that I think is going to be essential for the future operating environment. We fielded some additional advanced sensors that improve our ability to hold adversary assets at risk across domains. Really powerful contribution to the MAGTF and the Joint Force. So moving out, really seeing quite substantial gains that we think support our long-term deterrence objectives and warfighting readiness objectives in the region. Thank you.
Well, I was going to ask you about the MLRs. You kind of already talked about them, but I was wondering if you maybe could, you've already talked about sort of what they are and the capabilities that they bring. Could you tell me maybe the status of them? I know the 3rd MLR was the first one designated, I think is the term. And then 12th MLR was designated last year, I believe. So just sort of like where they are, that you mentioned the infantry. Well, it's not just infantry, but the part of the 12th MLR was just the LCT was just so if you could just talk about sort of where we are in the process of the MLRs, because there's kind of a schedule there.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So 3rd MLR is most mature with the incorporation of the advanced capabilities that are integral to force design. Even as we've been building 3rd MLR, they've established a substantial and recurring presence in the Philippines, most particularly up in Luzon. And while they're a globally deployable expeditionary force, they bring capabilities that are sort of uniquely tailored to being able to control or hold at risk key maritime terrain and choke points like those that are found in the first island chain. They're pretty far along with the evolution of their capabilities. And we have a little bit more work to do with them, but we just the last month completed a combat readiness evaluation in Hawaii. Purposeful that we did it in Hawaii, that intensely maritime environment that shares a lot of commonality with the environment in the Philippine archipelago. And it also provided us an opportunity to work with key enabling capabilities across the joint force, which was really powerful. But I think the headline as it relates to 3rd MLR is a formal combat readiness evaluation that found them proficient and capable across all of their mission essential tasks. 12th MLR was established roughly 2 years behind 3rd MLR. And, they have more ground to cover in terms of their maturing. But there's a lot of things for us to be really excited about in terms of the capability that they currently bring. They are very deeply integrated with the Japanese self-defense forces, and that makes us a much stronger team. And together, the JSDF and 12th MLR, they provide really important capability for the MEF in the Ryukyus, which is just really central to our ability to support our operational responsibilities. And from my perspective, they're kind of the gold standard in the division, arguably in the Marine Corps, on bilateral integration and bilateral command and control. So even though they're behind 3rd MLR in terms of evolving and maturing their capability, what they bring to 3 MEF, because of the way they've integrated with the Japanese self-defense forces, is invaluable and really powerful.
I would just offer one other thought, just to and what General Workman said was absolutely perfect, and we're super proud of the progress that's been made there. But sometimes sometimes there's a little bit of a pitfall, is that people will talk about forced modernization, and then and they'll talk about the MLRs, when really it's much broader than that, right? It really is a transformation across the entire Marine Air Ground Task Force, and the MLRs are an important part of that. But really, we view this as the capabilities that are resident in the MEF command element, what our information group capabilities it provides, what the rest of the Marine Division provide, what our Marine Logistics Group provides, and last but certainly not least is the incredible capability that the Marine Air Wing brings to this. So it's really, sometimes, like I said, that construct kind of exists where folks kind of equate force design with just the MLR, when it's a much broader capability that the entire Marine Expeditionary Force comes together to produce the capabilities that we are describing.
Sure. Well, so you mentioned logistics, and I did want to ask about that, because I think certainly logistics is a very important element of what you do, but it's not the thing that most people talk about. They talk about the MLRs, or they talk about maybe the aviation assets, but most people are not talking about logistics, even though it's, the other forces can't operate without logistics. So I was just, if you could maybe talk a little bit about some of the logistics, either modernization or the things that are happening in the Pacific for logistics, and especially like the potential for contested logistics, whether that's contested in like a combat scenario, or even just with all the weather that happens, some of the severe weather that happens in this theater, how you sort of are working around that.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And it certainly that dominates our thinking out here because of the distances involved in the Pacific. And as you know well, it's really a strategic logistics problem, operational and tactical logistics problem. So I think for the MEF, right, we're mostly focused on tactical logistics, and then we connect up to the operational logistics levels that are being worked on across Indo-PACOM. But as we look at our tactical logistics capability, first, there's a lot of what we would consider very traditional logistics capabilities in just the movement of people and things and ammunition and casualties and how that occurs in what traditional land combat. When you complicate that with the environment we have out here and the extended distances in the littorals, you now have to look at connectors. And so first, the Marine Air Wing and the Joint Force help a lot in that. So our ability to connect using our aviation assets is critical. But you're definitely, we definitely need to use sea connectors or amphibious forces and alike to produce the combat capabilities we need logistically. So I think that starts in a couple of ways. So we think that the maritime prepositioning ships are still a critical capability, and we don't think that we're in any position to walk away from the investments that the Navy and Marine Corps have made in our MPS fleet and what that provides us. The second big component of that is just really our amphibious warfare ships, and the capability for amphibious warfare ships to move people and things in contested areas is still critical. And then the third leg of our surface capability is the necessity really to have a littoral craft that can connect these areas. And so I know that you're well aware of the LSM program and the services requirement for 35 LSMs. And then there's a lot of discussion taking place on what form factor that takes. But there's a critical need that we have really all three legs of that maritime logistics capability in order to enable our concept of operations, and then being able to sustain that under pressure is really a critical aspect of what we think about out here. And I don't know, General Wortman, do you have anything to add?
Nothing to add, sir. Thanks very much.
On that, so you had mentioned before also the amphibious ship availability, and I know it's been a continuing issue for the Marine Corps. You guys are, you pride yourself on being the 911 force for the nation, but obviously you need to be able to get to the, you need the ambulance to drive to the emergency kind of thing. And so I was just, how is that being addressed? And then, to take that one step further, even if the ships are available, they can't just land. A giant amphibious ship can't just land anywhere, can't land on one of these small islands that doesn't have a port. So if you could maybe talk about, I know there was a stern landing vessel that was, I think, being tested, and maybe some other things that are out there. What is kind of the status of that? Even the, I'm trying to remember, the ACU or ACV, I think, I don't know if you guys are using that out there. So if you could just talk a little bit about those, like the amphibious ship availability, but also the things that would be able to get you from that amphibious ship onto the shore.
Yeah, sure. That's yeah, I think first is understanding the necessity for amphibious warfare ships. That those ships are purpose built for conducting operations in the littorals and being able to project power ashore across the range of military operations, right? And those ships are designed to be able to kind of do all of that functionality, and then they have pretty impressive survivability components built into them, and so those are the real tools of the trade, and that needs to be our focus. So the capacity of the amphibious fleet, and then the readiness of the amphibious fleet. So both of those things have been a significant challenge for us over the last several years. And so the capacity is probably insufficient, and the readiness is certainly insufficient to be able to produce the capabilities that we think are so important, and the combatant commanders do as well. When we move on to the LSM problem, so as you described, we've been doing some experimentation out here with a vessel called the Stern Landing Vessel, and it's really a modified commercial kind of oil drilling type of asset, and it's been pretty exciting to see some of the capabilities that it has. And then so we're doing some experimentation with other craft as we look to solve the problem between kind of the objective capability and some sort of a threshold or gap filling capability that we need. We need right away, and so that's really been the journey with that. And then there's some other experimentation that you're probably aware of about using semi-submersibles and alike, and we're doing some of that testing as well. And I think that's a potential partial solution, but we really think that the problem needs to be solved with a family of systems, probably not a single silver bullet type approach, but rather a family of connectors that would enable us to sustain the force under pressure, and that's really where we're aiming.
Jennifer, I think I would only emphasize the point that you made about sort of the austere nature of the infrastructure here, and super grateful for the work that's being done back at the service headquarters with some of the capabilities that General Turner mentioned, that low profile vessel, the Stern Landing Vessel, and then other work to create more options to get into small ports, get access to beaches and quays that kind of current capability does not provide us access to. It's all about the business of projecting force and sustaining that force, projecting it quickly and then sustaining it over time. But we feel the work that the service is doing to create some additional options for us here. And in a lot of ways, I feel like it emphasizes the power and importance of our posture here in the region. It is a lift challenge to get into the Western Pacific. And in some respects, that is simplified for us because of the unique posture that we enjoy in the relationship with our allies and partners. And that's, a really important element of being relevant in the way that General Turner described as a stand-in force.
Okay. So I wanted to kind of hop back over to the discussion that both of you gentlemen have started about partnerships and sort of the importance of partnerships in this region. I mean, everybody that I ever talk to in the Indo-Pacific talks about partnerships and how important they are to deterrence and just in general. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the importance for the Marine Corps and for you gentlemen, for your Marines, and you mentioned the Philippines, but I know South Korea, and Japan. Obviously, you spoke about Japan. You are in Japan right now. Just some of these partnerships and the importance and kind of what sorts of things you're doing with these other countries. I think sometimes when we hear interoperability or partnerships, we think like, oh, they both two forces go to a place and they do a thing and then they leave. And it's, they're doing something next to each other. But it seems like the interoperability is a lot more, it is actually more interoperable than just doing a thing next to each other kind of situation.
Yeah, I'll start, and then and General Wortman probably has some thoughts on that question too. But I think first and foremost is what's driving the partners is really kind of the threat. And as we see what China is doing, particularly in and around Taiwan, Philippines, in Japan, really across the region, they're really they're pressurizing the situation in ways that are really making our partners and allies take notice and make big changes based on the threat and their perception of it. I mean, if you look at what they've done around, let's just say Taiwan over the last year or so, it is incredibly aggressive. And we're seeing them, and I think as Admiral Paparo said recently, these things have kind of morphed from exercises to rehearsals, and we're seeing the speed and complexity and the capacity as they do these sorts of pressure campaigns. And really, I think that's what's driving the motivation of our allies and partners out here. And that's what's led to these big changes in the Japanese defense. We're seeing this in Korea. We see this in the Philippines and really across the region. And so I think since the threat is so significant, you can feel the energy and it's palpable. And so I would think that maybe in the past where the bilateral exercises were kind of a nice to do, I think they're recognized as essential now from both us and for our partners and allies. I think the other piece that we were able to do in a lot of the capabilities that we now have in 3MEF is our ability to actually bring partners and allies and weave that together to provide really meaningful capability and building synergy out of those partnerships in ways that we haven't been able to do before. And I think that's probably what's changed is that, so an example would be our ability to close a bilateral kill chain, our ability to share information at speed, our ability to do bilateral medical, bilateral logistics. And so those are some of the big areas of success, I think, over the last several years. But it's really all underpinned by the omnipresent threat that's driving this level of cooperation.
Jennifer, I think the only items that I would add is, this is the everyday work of 3MEF, 3rd Marine Division, the other elements of the 3MEF MAGTAF. And, episodically, you'll see major exercises, but this is work and training and planning and coordination that is going on every day out here. I mentioned 12th MLR works very closely with the Japanese self-defense forces across the Ryukyu Islands. 3rd MLR, frequent flyers in and out of the Philippines. 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, they are engaged with allies and partners with the Joint Force to answer General Turner's information requirements, my information requirements every single day. And it's just work that could not be done without our allies and partners. And every time we work with them, we build one another's readiness, we build our interoperability with them, and then we just get so much leverage and mileage out of their unique understanding of the operating environment. So really powerful tools, but I guess the point of emphasis is, you could, kind of take a look at what we're releasing to the media or what's on social media and get a sense that it's an episodic exercise program. I would say it runs much, much deeper than that, and it unlocks a lot of combat power, warfighting readiness, and lethality for when we need it.
Okay, now I think we're getting, we're almost running out of time, but I did want to give you both the chance to, if there's something that I didn't ask about or I didn't give you an opportunity to talk about that you did want to mention. I didn't ask about other new weapons or capabilities you have coming online. I know there's probably a lot of things that you are happy to talk about, but if there's anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap up here.
Jennifer, I think I'll finish where I started. A lot has changed, but a lot remains foundational, and that's combined arms and small unit leader excellence. It's built on high standards at every level of the organization, and an intense focus out here on warfighting readiness and lethality. We're in the business of avoiding conflict, and we contribute to that effort by being ready and being lethal. And the Marines of the division, aligned with General Turner's vision for the MEF, are working hard to provide that readiness and deterrence, and to ensure that, if we've got a transition in some kind of a crisis, we're able to do that well. Didn't have an opportunity to touch on 4th Marine Regiment. They're the ground combined arms, combat power of the division, very, very flexible force in the same way that the MLRs are engaged across the region. 4th Marine Regiment is engaged in making a really important difference with our campaigning activities, and our headquarters battalion, the engine of the entire operation that enables us to maintain that high tempo, distributed command and control, project the force, and sustain the force. So really proud of the Marines and sailors across the entire division. Really proud of the division's contribution to the 3 MEF campaign. And as much as we're excited about the modernization, I'm really, really proud that we hold tight to the warfighting ethos and legacy of the service. Thanks very much for the opportunity to participate today. Thank you.
Yeah, I think General Wortman stated it extremely well, and I probably can't improve on that. But I think we have a hyper focus on campaigning out here to deter and building relevant capabilities that create those tactical and operational dilemmas for potential adversaries. Reinforcing our partners, reassuring our partners, and that really is the work of the day. I think we've made some exciting gains here in the last couple of years, and we're just hyper focused on continuing to deliver and kind of run up the score in those advantages so that we can keep the peace out here in the Western Pacific. And so that's our focus. And then if deterrence shall fail, then we're ready to pivot to conflict and win the fight. But it is we're extremely proud to be able to represent the Marine Corps out here in the Western Pacific, and we'll continue to reinforce all the things that we talked about today. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Lieutenant General Turner and Major General Wortman, for joining us, for sharing your insights and experience with us today. It was I really appreciate it. Next, my colleague Patrick will take the helm of our State of the Navy discussion, delving into the lessons the Navy is learning from ongoing operations in the Middle East and what we can anticipate for the future. For Defense One, I'm Jennifer Ladd. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Patrick Tucker, Science and Technology Editor at Defense One, and I'm thrilled to continue our State of Defense discussion with a focus on lessons from the Red Sea. For years, the Navy has safeguarded freedom of navigation worldwide, but tensions in the Red Sea escalated dramatically. In late 2023, the U.S. Navy is now engaged in its most sustained combat operations since World War II. Join us as we explore what the service is learning from these ongoing operations in the Middle East and what we can expect moving forward. I'm very pleased to welcome our distinguished guests, Vice Admiral Robert Murrett, former Vice Director of Intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, currently leads the Institute for Security Policy and Law at Syracuse University, and he is retired. I should point that out too. James Holmes, Professor of Strategy and the J.C. Wiley Chair of Maritime Strategy at the Naval War College and Distinguished Fellow at the Brute Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare at the Marine Corps University. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
Patrick, good to be here.
Thank you very much. So first, what is the state of the Red Sea right now in terms of what you're seeing from the Houthis, from different Iranian proxy groups in the region, and other potential actors? Are you seeing escalation? Are you seeing changes in tactics? And just sort of, if you would, characterize the most important things for the audience right now in terms of what's going on today.
Yeah, James, I guess I can start. Just a couple of points I would make, and as we do sometimes tend to put things into three bins for the strategic, the operational, and the tactical. In terms of level of activity, I think there's been an ebb and flow now for about a year and a half, and it continues to go back and forth, although we should say it has been sustained. There haven't been any real breaks in terms of combat operations that we've had in the southern Red Sea for that period of time. And the impacts that it has had, certainly on the tactical level for the Navy, which I'm sure we'll get into more detail, have to do with weapons utilization and how to have our primarily destroyers, but also integrated air assets and so forth, take on a variety of different kinds of incoming weapons, primarily ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, and then unmanned aircraft, and what can be described as swarm attacks, including two very large-scale ones over the course of the past year. And I think that's the tactical aspect. On the operational level, I think how the forces have come together and the really difficult coordination for air defense across the region, which has involved multiple countries, ships, aircraft, and so forth, and a very difficult picture, but one that's been, from a command and control standpoint, handled, I would say, very, very effectively. Then third, there's the strategic picture, what the implications are for what has happened there for beyond the Red Sea, not just because of the Suez Canal and the implications, devastating implications for the Egyptian economy and so forth, but for Iran and their other proxies that they have beyond the Houthis and the region, but also the lessons that are being learned strategically by the Chinese Navy around the world, other countries that are looking very carefully at the kinds of combat that has taken place in the Red Sea and deriving a lot of lessons from them, accurate or inaccurate, but the implications that span the globe really for other countries around the world that are paying attention to what's happening in the Red Sea.
Yes. So, Mr. Holmes, you recently had a group from the USS Carney at the War College to kind of give a rundown of their experience. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned from them in terms of what's going on there and what their experiences were like?
Yeah, sure. They gave actually two briefings. They gave an unclassified briefing, which I did attend, and a classified briefing, which I did not attend. So everything I say will be really perfectly unclassified. Yeah, it's a good news story on the tactical level and on the operational level, and it's predominantly good news, I should say. We found out that our stuff works. We can actually handle things like anti-ship ballistic missiles, which we have been sort of wringing our hands about for at least the last decade. Of course, the Chinese call them carrier killers, which is something that perks up attention here in the United States. So it's good to know that this combination of sensors, computers, and anti-air and anti-missile weapons actually works. You never know for sure until you actually use a weapon in combat against a real living adversary for the first time, and we've done that. So that's the good news. I think from a strategic and an operational standpoint, I think the news is kind of mixed. there was a story over at Real Clear Defense on the USS Gettysburg F-18 shoot down, which happened back in late December. And the author is a person who commanded 3 Aegis cruisers like Gettysburg, and he says, look, this ship was basically hurried through certifications and sent off at best a borderline level of readiness, rushed into combat. I mean, so when you talk about sending a half-trained crew into combat against a living, breathing adversary with ingenuity and so forth, like the Houthis or like whoever the case may be, that's a pretty. I mean, it's a pretty serious indictment that the Navy is too small. I mean, we simply don't have enough surplus assets so that you could hold back a group or a ship that was having a little trouble getting ready, and to basically plug in another one. We're simply too lean. And I think that's the bad news story out of the Red Sea, as well as elsewhere in the Western Pacific and the Indian Ocean, all the theaters that we're interested in.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that it sort of speaks to a bigger potential challenge. If we are pushing on readiness to deal with the situation in the Red Sea, what does that say about our potential readiness in other operational zones in Indo-PACOM, for instance? Is there a way to, we know that China has now the largest Navy in terms of actual ships. Is there a way to scale up either the effectiveness of the surface warfare capabilities that we have there, so that you have capabilities that are doing much more with much less? There's not an easy avenue to rapidly increase shipbuilding capacity, at least not without relying somewhat on foreign ship yards and things like that. So in terms of those lessons, when you look at the Red Sea, what does that tell you about challenges for the rest of the Navy in terms of increasing readiness and making sure that there's capability to deal with much potentially larger problems, such as continued Chinese aggression in the Indo-PACOM AOR?
Yeah, Patrick, that's a great question. I guess, and turn over to James too, but put that in just a couple of categories. I think the first one is, a biblical issue for our Navy for many, many years now, probably since its inception, has been kind of taking a lower level of current operational tempo, ops tempo, and using that as a means to increase the capability of the Navy and focus on future capabilities, just from a budgetary standpoint and from the standpoint of what we call op tempo and purse tempo within the Navy. We're not going to be able to do that anytime soon. And I think the big issue related to the point you just made is we can talk about this longer, but I don't see, between the Middle East, the Far East, things that are happening in the Eastern Mediterranean, because some of those units have been involved relative to combat operations as well. I don't see anything on the horizon that would enable us to have any kind of pause or a lower op tempo and purse tempo, just based upon the contingencies that we have to face around the world in all the numbered fleet areas. Second point I would just make is that the things that we've learned there have relevance, but in terms of readiness for the Navy, you have to make trades. And I thought the point that James made earlier, just in the whole workup cycle and making sure that you have that deliberate training, the kind of things that aren't quite as exciting, but absolutely vital in the readiness and training areas that we have, for example, off of California and the Puerto Rican op area and so forth. You can't do any shortcuts like that. I think what happened with Gettysburg is evidence of that. So you have to take that very, very seriously. The Navy has traditionally done a very good job of that, making sure you went through ORE, TYT2, 1, 2, 3. We've all been through all that stuff in the various training areas, and you can't slack off in that, notwithstanding the current operational tempo that we have.
Yeah, I would add just a couple of things. First of all, you said something about doing more with less, and I always, whenever I hear our talking about doing that, I always think about the Imperial Japanese Navy heading into World War II. That was how they scored. They tried to square the circle. Oh, we are Japanese. We are excellent, and we're going to get a lot more out of our platforms against the Americans, who are not nearly as good technologically or in terms of seamanship and gunnery and so forth. So you really have to be careful about that sort of mysticism. I mean, never ever underestimate your adversary, who has as many brain cells and as much desire to prevail and as much ingenuity as you do, or at least that's the way to assume. So I think we have to be aware of out of that. I hope we are still better on a qualitative level. I think we are, but we really have to always be looking in the mirror and asking ourselves whether that assumption actually still holds true. The other thing I would add is simply that the adversaries scattered all around the Eurasian perimeter, they get a say in our operational tempo. I think what you're looking at is a concerted effort to divide and thin out the Navy in any given body of water by imposing these commitments on us. They know that our leadership will send us to try to take care of this. Who else is going to do it in the Red Sea? Who else is going to do it in the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait? By imposing a bunch of different commitments, again, they divide us up. They thin us out at a time in which our leadership says we need to concentrate in the Western Pacific, because that's where the major adversary is generally concentrated. So some commentators have started calling it an axis, sort of cutesy titles like axis of people and so forth. But I think there's not a formal axis like there was in 1940, but there's certainly a level of coordination that's becoming increasingly apparent.
Yeah, and that coordination between powers that have been represented, certainly in the last two national defense strategies, national security strategies, as very serious peers, competitors, the pacing challenge and the immediate challenge, Russia and China, you see increased coordination among them. How do they benefit from this increased activity in the Red Sea, in terms of, as you pointed out, wearing down the ability of the U.S. to be in all places at all times at an appropriate level of readiness? Do you think that this is something that is part of their understanding of how they support different actors in that area? And also, how else are you seeing, for instance, China and Russia, to a bit lesser extent, begin to move soft power into the region in order to erode public support potentially for U.S. operations, in order to seduce, if you will, potential allied regions like China's recent military partnership with the UAE? What are they thinking about when they see what's going on in the Red Sea? How does that affect them strategically, and where do you see that going from them?
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments on that. I think that gets down to strategy, Patrick, and specifically it has implications for the Navy and also for the other services, for force structure, and for the overall output of what we call the JSCAP. And without getting too joint staff wonky on you, but the op plans that we have for the combatant commanders. As you know, the two major regional conflict strategy that we had through the 1980s until the 90s, and it kind of dried up. And we're now in kind of a 1+1, in which we're really only ready for one major regional conflict, and then a smaller, they use different names for it, but a smaller contingency in another part of the world, and a holding action, which puts particular stress on the Air Force and the Navy as opposed to the ground units, the BCTs from the Army. But I think the bad news on that is we're seeing, relative to for example, take the East China Sea, South China Sea, and events in the Middle East, whether it's the Gulf of Oman and Red Sea and so on, and being able to sustain both of those simultaneously. And if one of them or they were both to rise to the level around an MRC kind of conflict, could we handle that with the force structure that we have today? The answer is probably not. We'd have to fight a holding action in one area before we could do what's known as the ancient history for you folks, the swing strategy, if anybody remembers the swing strategy. But this has to do with the ability of military units, Navy, Air Force, but also Army BCTs to get from one theater to another theater to meet the second MRC, which is in a holding action. So we're seeing a little bit of that play out at a lower level today. And that may be a good thing, because the implications for the contingency planning that we do on the Joint Staff and with the Defense Department, and what the operational plans call for, and especially, without getting again too wonky on you, the TIPFID, which is the major point of pain for having a 2 MRC strategy, will have implications for force structure, and how many Air Force wings we need, how many Marine Corps, battalion and beyond units, BCTs of the Army, and ships of the Navy. And that's probably a conversation that is as informed today as it has been until the 1980s, certainly during the Cold War, and one that had a lot of attention in the years ahead.
Yeah, James, that's.
Yeah, I might add just a cultural point to what the Admiral said. I mean, I actually might go a little bit farther than he does. Even I actually almost think we're seeing a cultural revolution within the United States, certainly within the United States Navy and Marine Corps, but potentially within the entire joint force. We've always thought of ourselves as an offensive fighting force because that's our history. That's encoded in our DNA, arguably reaching back a century, but certainly back to World War II. So we are a sea control. We are a command of the sea force. We go in and fight offensive actions, clear out or sink the enemy's fleet, and then we do what we want from the sea. I mean, that's how it works. But I think, of course, Admiral Franchetti's been dismissed. But if you look at her navigation plan, she was quite clear that we are going to be the weaker party at the outset of a conflict, especially in the Western Pacific, but potentially elsewhere as well. And therefore, we need to be thinking in sea denial terms, and that's a strategically defensive posture. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you read the works of Corbett reaching back a century, I mean, even the Royal Navy when it ruled the waves. Corbett said, look, you're not going to always be stronger at every point on the map at all times, and you better think about how to do things to basically balk the enemy's strategy, keep them from using the sea to get across the Taiwan Strait or whatever the case may be, until such time as you can mass combat power at the time and place of action, and then go on offense and win. So you're talking about changing practices and attitudes that are deeply ingrained. And starting to think in a more realistic manner. So I hope that we will continue with that cultural revolution and get used to thinking in those terms so that we don't just rush in and suffer a crushing defeat at the outset if we're not stronger.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. And remembering some of the things that Admiral Franchetti had talked about in her time, she also described the current moment as being very akin to the tension of the 1930s in terms of the stakes, basically, of two very large, increasingly coordinating powers and the way they may seek to, across different domains, both within the formal kinetic military domain, but in other ways challenge the United States and Western democracy in so many different forms and formulations. So I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier, though, in the Red Sea, the tactical success of some of the operations to down Houthi drones and the tremendous success of, for instance, that salvo that happened last year, where you had something like 200 different combination of drones and ballistic missiles that were dispatched quite incredibly and successfully, but at somewhat of a significant cost because standard missiles are they're not cheap. When you look at this space and you look at the enthusiasm right now around autonomous solutions at sea, when you look at the capability of drones to have effects, particularly in that sort of environment, do you see a possibility for the U.S. to, because as you point out, there's going to be a kind of gap in terms of where we need to be and where we are right now. It's not easily filled, but does the pace of emerging technology, particularly around maritime autonomy, are we using that to best effect, and are we at risk of perhaps putting too much faith in some of these solutions that sort of dazzle on YouTube, but might not be operationally exactly what we need when countering either a group like the Houthis or potentially something like the Chinese Navy in the Strait of Taiwan?
Patrick, I think it's a great question. Just a couple comments I'd make on that and turn over to James. I think the weapons mix that needs to be used in the contingency, and again, we're down to the tactical level, talking about the Red Sea, but also the Eastern Mediterranean and then the implications beyond. But I think we've learned a lot of lessons in terms of, well, first, one major asterisk I would offer, I was asked in one of these sessions a couple of months ago if I was concerned about firing SM-2s against unmanned small aircraft, which the price tag I see in an SM-2 is typically about $2.4 million. I told him I wasn't the least bit concerned about that. I said, every man or woman on those destroyers, use whatever you got and don't worry about the price tag. And we'll sort that out later on. So that shouldn't even be a thought. Having said that, if you have a wide variety of targets coming at you with different types of capability, ranging from, again, anti-ship ballistic missiles to anti-ship cruise missiles, and then a whole variety of unmanned aircraft. There probably are some things in terms of soft kill, close-in weapon systems, for example, that would certainly be more efficient if you want to look at that. And I think that'll be a topic for discussion after you get out of the war fight. I mean, the battles that we've had in the Red Sea that we could have in, with generous time constraints. But for the time being, I think we have to, as quote Donald Rumsfeld, you go to war with the weapons you have and the forces you have. I think that's what we have to do today, but have an informed discussion about perhaps more efficiency in NAR operations. A final comment before handing it over to James. You have to kind of step back and just, it is breathtaking, the coordinated at the CFAC, the Combined Force Air Coordination Center, which exists in the Middle East, what they have done in the two large-scale engagements we've had with all the targets that have been out there, and the coordination between airborne units, ships in the Eastern Mediterranean, ships in the Red Sea, ground-based units, Jordanians, Brits, Americans, French. I mean, I have nothing but admiration for the center of gravity on that down at Maxwell Air Force Base at Air Command and Staff. The level of proficiency that we have for really complicated air battles that have taken place, and the shutout record that they have had, which is, as I said, breathtaking. We ought to step back for a moment as we're trying to get better all the time and acknowledge that those were the two big engagements we've had were hugely successful. And I commend all the men and women at the CFAC for being behind that.
Yeah, and I'll let James answer too, but it is certainly marvelous and inspiring. And as someone that played hockey as a goalie, no one really celebrates the goalie until like the performance is really stellar. But you're always remembered for the one you let in, and so it's a tough job. And to be relegated now is kind of the goalie of the sea. That is, as James points out, that is a pretty big culture change, and it is a more difficult position to defend. But James, I'll let you answer on autonomy and emerging technologies and how to use them correctly in this new environment.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like the 1920s and 1930s, which was what you led off with talking about. I mean, it's whenever a new widget, a new technology comes into being, the tendency is to view it as an adjunct, an auxiliary to what you already do well. The carrier was basically going to be the eyes of the fleet. It was going to range ahead and then vector in the battleship fleet so they could pound the enemy to smithereens. And I mean, it obviously didn't end up being that way. Military aviation matured into a primary instrument of naval warfare. So I think it feels like we're having that discussion with unmanned submersibles, unmanned surface craft and aircraft, which we're in an experimental phase and trying to figure out. We're studying the Ukraine war, we're studying the Red Sea, and trying to figure out exactly where these things fit in the scheme of things. I think it was Admiral Richardson, one of our past CNOs, like to talk about the disparity between platforms and between payloads. Platforms is kind of a disaster for the reasons that we've been talking about with shipbuilding. We're not going to make the Navy big enough, or even probably bigger at all before 2027, when Admiral Franchetti wanted to. But on that, we seem to be doing pretty well on the payload side, and it feels like that sort of blurs into where drones are. We have an air-launched SM-6. We have a variety of things coming online that can reach the fleet in the next couple of years, which is a good news story. Admiral, I violently agree with the Admiral about the price of defensive engagements. To me, it's less a matter of money, but it's a huge deal as far as the supply of these weapons. We simply can't crank them out like we did in World War II, where you're just cranking out shell after shell after shell by the thousands and millions. It simply doesn't work that way anymore. So to me, the ability to restock those things is more important than the price. Price is a big deal, obviously. I mean, an SM-3, I think, runs upwards of $30 million a round for engaging a ballistic missile. Sort of half of the price of an F-35 to take out one missile. But and the other thing that bugs me is the logistical problem, which is also starting to be solved as well. One of the things I most admired about Secretary Del Toro, who was recently departed as Secretary of the Navy, is he was constantly, from the minute he took over in the Biden administration, pushing for missile reload at sea. Last fall, they finally tested at sea something called TRAM, which is a system basically where you can transfer missiles and download them into VLS cells, which are basically silos in the hull of a ship. Very difficult thing to do while riding the waves, because the ships tend to move, and you simply can't bang those things against the side of the silos. But it feels like we may have a solution there as well. You do that, and you can keep combat power on station much longer, rather than withdrawing a destroyer and sending it back to Greece or sending it to Bahrain or somewhere like that from the Red Sea to reload. So it feels like we're on the cusp of getting a lot of things right. I think, and I hope that a 2-year turnaround is doable. It feels like it might be. It's sort of a good news, bad news story, just like everything in military affairs.
Yes, exactly. But on that, one of the things you mentioned Bahrain, and a little bit to the Admiral's earlier point. I think one of the things that this really showcases in terms of what's very successful and works very well in our favor is the military-to-military partnerships and alliances that we have all around the world. Jordanians were pretty key to this, and obviously in the Mediterranean, and certainly we see Indo-PACOM. That is something that they've moved out very heavily on, is joint exercises among all the regional players there, with the exception of Taiwan, for reasons that are we all understand, that are part of policy. But all of the other regional actors are, we're told, not just being led into joint exercises, but asking the United States to begin to conduct joint exercises that they can all take part in to erect a sort of regional understanding. These are countries that have never before, that have histories of tremendous hostility towards one another, as we all know, that are now finding new ways through the U.S. military to begin to coordinate and develop strategies that allow for a much more better collective defense. So I would ask you on this. There's, of course, tremendous, political upheaval discussion. It's a very fun news cycle, if you like excitement. But the mill-to-mill relationships and partnerships that are really essential for U.S. operations around the world. I would just ask, because I think the Red Sea is a great showcase of their importance. How do you rate their health right now? And what should policymakers and the public be aware of and keep in mind when thinking about how to strengthen those relationships, particularly on the mill-to-mill level? And if you could just sort of highlight the importance of them, particularly for anywhere we operate, especially as we go into a more defensive role in the future.
Yeah, Patrick, that's a great point. I would just make 2 points related to that. One, it's kind of related to the news cycle. The other one is not related to the news cycle. I'll start with the second one, and that is that too often we don't take that into account as much as we should. And one of the frustrations I think a lot of us have relative to strategy, we always talk about the United States and China and all the dimensions, whether it's economic matters, military, broader security perspective, as if Japan doesn't exist, or the Republic of Korea doesn't exist, or Australia, or the Philippines, or we have a defense agreement with the Republic of Vietnam, which I didn't think I'd see in my lifetime. But if you look at the perspective from China, just in terms of East Asia, it's pretty bleak in terms of friends in the neighborhood, where we kind of take for granted that we basically run the table in terms of all the allies we have in the region. The new agreement we have with the Philippines, which is essential because the training ranges have been deployed over their ancient history to Subic Bay many times. The training opportunities in the Philippines are probably the best in the world for air and surface forces, but also for ground-based forces. So I think we ignore our allies at our peril, and particularly, and I use the example, I always thought that one of the best places to get perspective on China and all the military dimensions there is in Tokyo. And when I was at our Pacific Fleet headquarters, I had to spend a lot of time in Tokyo. And their perspective and their view from East Asia is vital, as well as the other partners we have in the region. And we can't emphasize that enough. The second point in all that is that our proficiency, maritime proficiency, you can rack and stack either with Janes or from the Defense Intelligence Agency. They put unclassified things out of how proficient these international navies are. Japan is certainly top 3 worldwide in terms of just seamanship, tactical proficiency. They're just really, really good at what they do. And I'm not going to get into a top 10 list for you, but there's a lot of other ones around the world that we could pay attention to that are also superb, just in how tough they are and how difficult the training that they go through is. Okay, the one final thing on the news cycle that I think is important is that you might have heard Ursula von der Leyen say just earlier this morning that Europe is rearming. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of that will be focused on ground forces, but some will be on naval forces. And just one of the things that we have seen just in the span of the career that I've had is the dismantling of the European navies. I mean, as recently as the big NATO exercises that, again, I'm doing the old guy thing here, NATO exercises that we had in the 70s and certainly into the 80s and a little bit into the early 90s, we had huge Navy participation from Spain, from Italy, from even Portugal, the Netherlands, France, and so on and so on. And what happened during the course of the 90s and the early noughts is most of those navies were dismantled is maybe saying it too strongly, but it was pretty close to that. I mean, just the the cruisers, the destroyers, and all the very capable ships they had were pretty much put up, and their navies, the shrinkage was stunning. And I think you're going to see that come back a little bit. I would say that most of the emphasis near term in Europe might be on ground forces, but I think some will be on naval forces as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually gonna agree with the Admiral once again. I mean, amazing. But I would actually look at the map of Eurasia. I mean, which is where that supercontinent is what the United States has always cared about the most. I would going from east to west. I would say our alliances and our allies, as he pointed out, are in the best shape in East Asia. We have a nascent relationship with the Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean, which is good. I mean, I'd say we've come a long way with the Indians, given all the historical baggage between us from the Cold War. But that's come a long way, and I could not agree more about European navies. I'm a desert storm guy. I remember being out there in the Gulf, and it almost felt like the latter stages of World War II that you see. If you come up on deck in the morning, you look and there's just ships as far as you can see on the horizon, carriers, European frigates, the Danes. We operated with the Danish frigate. Just a lot of that simply does not exist anymore. So that's, which is a bad news story as far as the Atlantic theater and the European theater. But yeah, I visited with the Japanese Navy and the Korean Navy. Those people are top notch. The point that I would close on is the political point, though. We have no strategic position in the rimlands of Western Europe, East Asia, or South Asia without allies and partners and friends. We really have to keep that. We really have to keep that at the center of our focus, our political focus, and our strategic focus, because we can't shape events in the rimlands as we've tried to do for over a century now, unless we can get there. We can't get there without allies.
Yeah, and I read recently about a potential base closing in Greece. Naval base closing. Have you been tracking that? Does that raise any concerns for you? If that were to happen, I'm not, necessarily have to confirm it or disconfirm it, but that is what's been reported is that there's a big potential base closure, U.S. naval base closure in Greece. That would suggest sort of a regressive policy in that regard.
Yeah, I think there's alternatives. I mean, you're always going to have, in terms of, port access and diplomatic clearance at different facilities, especially for IRC clearances for any nuclear-powered carriers or submarines. But I think you have different options in the Eastern Mediterranean that you could fall back on for some reason. And I'd like to think it's a temporary thing relative to Greece. But I mean, the linchpin that we have, especially in Italy, but other port facilities in the Mediterranean, I think we can rely upon those pretty strongly in the future.
Yeah.
James,
and also, I guess the military actually came out and said that base closure is not going to happen. So, but it underscores your point that we have to look towards a future that is where there is much more maneuverability between different ports and things like that, and that just speaks to the need to move much more faster, be much more nimble, and use all assets that are available anyway. But yes, James, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I'm primarily an Indo-Pacific guy, so I was going to do this as far as the base in Greece. But the basic point is very sound. I mean, we're sort of trying to diversify away from big established bases simply because they're going to get pelted by Chinese anti-ship. Or not anti-ship cruise missiles, but ballistic missiles of all types. So they're well with Japan. All of our bases in the first island chain are well within the Chinese weapons engagement zone. So so we're trying to diversify, become more nimble. The Marine Corps is reactivating some old World War II bases in places like Tinian, sort of as austere bases that you can go to and run supplies in and convert those into sort of a small scale basis. So the U.S. Air Force is doing the same thing. So that's which is good to see. But yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about a single base. The Mediterranean Sea is actually. I grew up next to the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea, so I think about bodies of water being huge expanses. The Mediterranean is actually a pretty cramped expanse. It's a fairly narrow sea, especially between Italy and Sicily and North Africa. So I wouldn't be too worried about our presence there, sustaining it. If you subtract a base from the mix, you have Rota, you got Italy. So I think we're good.
Yeah, just a final point I would add to that, and I think that James is spot on. But we do underestimate the ability that the Navy has and the investment we have in keeping sustained operations without port visits for long periods of time. And in that regard, I speak from experience. I've been underway in carriers for months at a time without any alongside. and for many, many months at a time without anything pierside. But I mean, all the AOEs, the fast replenishment ships we've got in the Navy, they're not very dramatic, and Hollywood doesn't make movies about the AOEs and the rest of it. But an aircraft carrier, there's evidence of that we've had recently, and like 13 months deployments, of which many of those months were no port visits for a long period of time, and I don't recommend that from a retention standpoint. But the United States Navy is very, very capable at doing without ports for extended periods of time, and a lot of us have firsthand experience in that.
General Tojo, right before he met his fate after the Second World War, he was asked what the top three reasons for U.S. victory in that war were. One of them was underway replenishment. I mean, if you can sustain the fleet at sea for weeks, if not months at a time, you could keep hammering away at the adversary. The Japanese simply could not do that. So that's something that's I think the combat logistics fleet has gotten way too lean. We're also working on that. I guess Secretary Del Toro's other big priority was coming up with a system where you can basically create civilian tankers and have them ferry fuel out to the logistics fleet that they can then carry it to the warships, and they can do unwraps. So there's movement on that side, on the technical side as well. But if we know very well that we have a problem, and we're trying to solve it, and I think we're making progress.
Yeah, I think so too. And to Admiral's point, the ability of the U.S. Navy to stay at sea for extended periods of time has also contributed to U.S. naval cooks being the best of any service, as far as anyone I can find can attest. But especially in the submarine fleet, they get the best of everything. As well they should.
Oh, you can get fat on a sub.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. And to the point about. Before we close, real quick, Europe and the possibility to now increase defense spending, generally a good news story, and they are moving to recreate aspects of military power. And as you point out, most of that is going to be land warfare, but some of it will surely be naval warfare, especially when you look at the need to better operate in the Black Sea. Which is something that has its own political dimensions and policy directions, but also seems like an important thing for, at very least, for many and other places to start to consider. They're going to be reestablishing this military power at a time where we're seeing, for instance, out of Ukraine, the ability to basically take out huge aspects of the Russian Black Sea Fleet without a formal navy. So now I think it's a really good example of where emerging technologies and new technologies are beginning to reshape what it means to have these assets for those that don't have kind of legacy systems and things like that. So it's a very exciting time. So before we close, I'll just ask both of you on the thing that you're sort of most excited about in terms of the opportunity window that we have now with partners and allies, but also in the U.S. Navy to change, to adapt quicker, to really go after objectives that have eluded us for a long time because of bureaucratic reasons, because of the state of technology or other things. The thing that you're most excited about in terms of this opportunity window today.
Just a great question, Patrick. I would just make 3 points in response to that. Briefly, first, relative to what you were mentioning earlier, I know the focus of this is lessons from the Red Sea, but we can't lose sight of the lessons from the Black Sea. And you hit the nail on the head. The Ukrainian Navy has done an extraordinary job of pushing the entire Russian Navy off to the extreme eastern reaches of the Black Sea, to include some places that border on Georgia, for crying out loud, but holding them at risk. And doing so in ways using new elements of warfare, especially semi-submerged, unmanned maritime vessels and so forth. So put that off to the side for now, because we're talking about the Red Sea, but we don't want to lose sight of the tremendous lessons learned and the huge success that the Ukrainian Navy has had at winning the Battle of the Black Sea, which they have done. And that kind of hasn't been in the news a lot lately, but it's something we need to underscore. The second thing I would just say is looking to the future. Leadership matters. I think the leadership that we have in the Navy today across several different points, and of course we had to trade out the CNO, which is unfortunate. But people like the Indo-PACOM commander, who some of us know very well, and many others around. I think the leadership we have in the Navy is going to be able to contend with these issues very effectively, and I've got very high confidence levels in terms of how that's going to be in the years ahead. And just a final comment: the defense industrial base. I think relative to growth and capabilities and the rest. There are a lot of concerns with that. The Defense Science Board just finished a really important study on the DIB, as we call it, the Defense Industrial Base, and a lot of really good analysis of shipyard capability and the kinds of things that the Navy is going to need from a technology standpoint, or the number of hulls we need to have in the water. And that's something that I expect to get a lot of attention in the years ahead, and that's certainly appropriate.
You know, I would take it in a little different. I mean, yes, what we're most excited about. I'm most excited to watch our ground-based services embrace their role as sea services. It's very, very hard to read the defense press any single day when you don't see something that the United States Army is doing or the United States Air Force is doing in order to contribute to the fight. I mean, this is an age of joint sea power, and that's always been true to a degree, but it's increasingly true as ground-based forces can reach farther out to sea with precision and lethality. And so I actually got to be friends with General Charlie Flynn, U.S. U.S. Army in the Pacific commander before he retired. He was fond of saying that the Pacific is a land theater. It's all about seizing and holding key terrain, putting surveillance, putting sensors on it, using it to not only to deny access to key terrain, to hostile forces, but also to work with the fleet in order to do the sea denial things, transition to sea control. So in a sense, we've talked a lot about alliances, and that's good. Think about the services. I mean, think about that as an alliance. I think you have a common culture of sea power and alliance among the services taking root, and that's a beautiful thing to see. I mean, the Army has a Typhoon missile battery in northern Luzon right now that can overshadow a lot of the South China Sea, and that makes our Chinese friends very unhappy, which is all to the good. So the Air Force just yesterday, a story broke that they're backfitting with their F-16s with Harpoon anti-ship missiles. Yes, it's an old and a fairly short-range missile, but that does amplify the Air Force's clout. So again, yeah, it's just kind of heartening to see. Army people who know their history, they will remind you that the Army did more amphibious stuff in the Pacific in World War II than the Marine Corps did. Probably not by percentage, but by bulk. And so it's good to see that legacy come back.
Yeah. Well, in terms of their outreach to the press, the U.S. Army in the Pacific is certainly more active than anybody else too. But and I appreciate that, and they would tell you that they're in many ways leading that effort to help build some of those mill-to-mill relationships, because it's very Army to Army. And to your point, Ed, before we close, this is one of the other big assets of the United States that I don't think folks appreciate. Is we're much better at joint operations than any other military, because we've had to be. Like we're. Yep. They can always be done better, but there's nobody really doing it better than us. And also, to your point, these alliances and partnerships that are built on the ground, mill to mill, daily. This is an asset. This is a public treasure that the United States has, that the citizens of the United States have, that they don't necessarily appreciate, and perhaps could appreciate a little bit more. Because if you don't appreciate things, sometimes you have trouble maintaining them. But yep. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. I want to thank you both so much for your time here, sharing these great insights with us. I feel encouraged and ennobled and ready to continue to think about all the different ways that we can, as a country, understand and use our Navy better and help them achieve their missions. And it sounds like we've had some really good framing of some ideas there. Up next, my colleague, Lauren Williams, will discuss the state of shipbuilding. For Defense One, I'm Patrick Tucker, and thank you for joining us.
What an engaging discussion, Patrick. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's State of Defense program, focusing on the state of the Navy and Marine Corps. If you're just tuning in, I'm Lauren Williams, Senior Editor at Defense One, and I'm excited to continue our conversation. The United States shipbuilding industry is being significantly outpaced by China. While commanders remain confident in the U.S. military's advantages, both the Pentagon and the Navy are diligently working to redirect efforts and revitalize American shipbuilding. To discuss the challenges facing both the service and the industry, as well as their strategies for overcoming these obstacles in the future, I'm pleased to welcome Brian Clark, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute. Brian, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Lauren. It's great to be here, and I'm glad you asked me to come.
I want to start with some of the more recent news during the president's joint address to Congress early this month. There was an announcement that there's the intention of creating an office for shipbuilding inside the White House. What does that mean?
Yeah, so the new administration, when they came in, already had set up an office that was focused on the maritime industry and was looking at both commercial and military shipbuilding. So that was something they had done kind of when they had first come in, and they've been populating that office since the administration came in last month, or I guess now 2 months or a month and a half ago. So what they've done now is formally institute this office, and they've got a set of naval experts and industry experts and former congressional staffers that are running this office focused on primarily how do we revitalize the U.S. maritime industry, running from ship carriers, commercial shipping, through wharf operations and port operations, all the way through to Navy shipbuilding. So it's the entire maritime industry, both military and commercial, that they're trying to promote.
Does having this visibility so high in the government, like, sitting in the executive branch, does that automatic, or I guess more so, how does that translate into actual bending of steel?
Yeah, great question. So we really haven't seen this level of attention to the maritime industry overall since before World War II, right? So when back then the Roosevelt administration set up a set of offices and initiatives to try to promote shipbuilding, and mostly in support of like the Lend-Lease program we were doing with the Allies. But we really haven't seen another effort like that since then. And so it's pretty interesting, pretty important, I guess, that you've got White House attention laser focused on this issue. Now, what it means in practice is a lot of the changes that people like me and others have been promoting for how do we reform the process of designing, developing, fielding new ships can be driven from within the government. So you don't need congressional approval to improve the process by which we develop new ship designs and build ships. You need congressional help to get money, but Congress has been providing lots of money to the military, to the Navy in particular, to build ships. And in a lot of ways, the Navy has not used that money effectively for a lot of reasons, which have to do with how they set requirements and how they enforce technical standards and how do they work with shipbuilders to phase in the construction of a new ship class. So all those things are things that White House office can address. Another thing the White House office can do is work with Congress on things like the Ships for America Act, which is currently getting ready to get proposed over on the Hill as part of this session's Congress, with the hopes of getting that put into law, which would dramatically increase the size of the U.S. flag merchant fleet, which has a bunch of follow-on effects for other parts of the maritime industry.
You mentioned about, I guess, some inefficiencies in terms of like Navy using some of the funding that it's gotten to just for shipbuilding. I know that there have been a couple of studies commissioned, like from the former Navy secretary. There's, I think, there's a Deloitte contract, and then you also there are several billion-dollar, at least contract ceiling, billion-dollar efforts going on. What would the White House be doing that these existing contracts aren't necessarily doing?
Well, the White House can come in and ask the Navy some hard questions about how it's been managing those industrial base efforts, because the Navy has gotten from Congress large billion-plus injections of funding over multiple years, particularly for the submarine industrial base to try to ramp up submarine production. And a lot of that money is being funneled to the supplier base, so the component manufacturers that are supporting the shipbuilders, Electric Boat and HII. And arguably, the Navy has not done a great job of managing those funds or managing that effort to improve the supplier base. And they've been hiring these outside entities. So Deloitte in one case, and the Blue Forge Alliance, which is a nonprofit entity, in another, spending billions of dollars on this supplier base. Hopefully that money is going to the right places in the right order to be able to support submarine production. But I'm unclear whether that's really happening because at the end of the day, the goal is to increase submarine production up to 2 per year for attack submarines. And the Navy's still languishing at 1 to 1.2 per year, which is obviously half of what they need. and what they're paying for as well. So I think the White House office would really try to look hard at how that money is being spent and could we better support the supplier base. Also, when it comes to the shipbuilders, how are we regulating their demand signal, and how are we regulating the requirements that we're levying on them? Are we basically piling on too much, particularly for submarine construction, into each new class of submarines? So do we need to maybe work with them to pull back some of those requirements so that we can build the ships faster, and then maybe feather in those new requirements over a longer period of time?
Yeah. And you mentioned Blue Forge Alliance, and at least for me, one of the big things with BFA is this Build Submarines, We Build Giants campaign, which is targeting the workforce. And when there's discussion of shipbuilding, I feel like the conversation always comes back to workforce. So can you walk us through what the challenges are there, and maybe what this new White House focus on shipbuilding could do for that part of the equation?
Yeah, good point. So so Blue Forge Alliance in particular is charged with coming up with ways to improve recruiting for shipbuilders or submarine builders in particular. And the challenges they have is that places like Groton, Connecticut, where Electric Boat is, have a pretty small population. They've already tapped out most of them. Most of the ones that want to work at the shipyard are working at the shipyard, and it's hard to recruit folks from further afield because it just isn't a huge population density up there. So they've been having challenges and having to recruit people from out of the area. So get people to relocate to Groton to work there, and that's part of what the Build Submarines campaign is about. Similarly, in Newport News, where HII is building submarines, same problems there, except it's a larger population center, but lots more competitors for employment, where you might be able to work in a cleaner environment, an easier environment, a warmer or colder environment, depending on the time of year, where it's an easier job, but you're making about the same amount of money. So coming up with ways to incentivize people to go into shipbuilding rather than working in the tech sector or working in retail, even down there. So that might mean compensation increases to pay people more, give them some kind of better package of compensation. The other thing that the Navy's looking at is this idea, though, of modular ship construction. How do I take the shipbuilding and put it where the people are available, the workers are available, rather than trying to get the workers to come to the shipbuilder? And so the Navy's been shifting some submarine production tasks down to Austell in Mobile, Alabama, where there's a more ample supply of workers. Some have been moved out to places like General Atomics, which has a big plant out in Oklahoma, where they do manufacturing for things like missile tubes. So I think this White House office, one of their goals will be to figure out how can we do more of that modularization of the ship, and particularly submarine, but other ship production processes, and take advantage of workforce availability in the center of the country, where we've got a lot of people that are skilled technical workers, but don't necessarily have the kind of work that they used to have in 20 years ago. So I think there's opportunities there that this White House office can help orchestrate, and working with the investment that they've made via these places, like Blue Forge Alliance, can you use that money to better tap into that workforce?
I know the SHIPS Act addresses this a little bit with the commercial shipbuilding piece. How would that sort of help with capacity?
Yeah, so the Ships for America Act, its kind of fundamental goal is to try to grow the U.S. flag merchant fleet to about 250 ships, which would be about more than double of what it is today. And how it does that is it basically provides competitive stipends to shipping companies that want to put their ships under U.S. flag. And then it phases in a requirement to have those ships be U.S. built. So today, a lot of the ships that are in international trade under U.S. flag are built overseas, Japan or Korea or Germany or whatever. And that would shift that to have most of those ships be eventually U.S. built, which would create a demand signal for the U.S. commercial shipbuilding industry to manufacture ships. Well, as that happens, you create a larger workforce of shipbuilders. You also create a supply chain that supports those shipbuilders. So now the military shipbuilding doesn't have to depend on its own specialized supply chains that it has to foster and keep alive. Now it can tap into a larger supply chain for equipment, pumps and winches and things that are common between commercial and military ships that are now being built in larger volumes because you've got a U.S. commercial shipbuilding industry. So that the combination of increase in the workforce, because you've got just a greater demand signal for shipbuilding, and then this improved supply chain resilience are two ways that the Ships for America Act then improves Navy shipbuilding.
And then there's this other part, which is autonomous ships or vessels, like whether they're surface or subsurface. And the building of that, Saronic is a robot shipbuilder. They made the announcement, given their recent round of funding, that they intend to build a new port or a new facility that will just produce these sort of autonomous vessels for the Navy. Where does that sort of fit into this longer scale of shipbuilding woes?
Yeah, well, I think this is an area where this White House office can also be helpful because the Navy has aspirations to build more uncrewed vessels. They have a bunch of demonstration models or prototypes that they've been running around. They've identified these as being a goal of their shipbuilding plans, but they just haven't moved very quickly on just buying the vessels and getting them out to operators. And this White House office can be a way to pressure or to drive the Navy to increase the procurement of these, especially when you look at the money that's being made available via this cut drill that's currently underway in the Defense Department, where they're freeing up 6 to 8% of each service's budget. That money is going to get reallocated to new priorities. One of those is going to have to be uncrewed surface vessels and uncrewed undersea vessels, because those are key to things like defending Taiwan, for example, from Chinese invasion. So the money will be made available via this cut drill. The White House office can start to work with the SecDev's office to push that money to the places where it can make the most difference. And why that's important is even with improvements to U.S. Navy shipbuilding, we're really not going to squeeze that many more ships out of the existing shipbuilding industrial base. So we'll get some incremental improvements there, but the Navy's traditional fleet will not grow that fast, even with those efforts, because the industrial base is sort of tapped out. So we're going to try to improve it, but that's really more of a long-term effort. These uncrewed surface vessels and drones and other smaller vessels are something you can build today in volume. And so places like Saronic are going to be able to build these at scale within a couple of years, as opposed to waiting 10 years to get the improvement in submarine production or destroyer production that we've been looking for.
What about building and repairing with allies and partners? Because, ships have to go to sea. They can't necessarily just turn right back around but every time they need to be repaired. So our allies and partners are going to be important there. Can you talk a bit about where that fits in?
Yeah, so we did a study earlier this year that we published that looked at ways to improve shipbuilding and ship repair. And it talked about the Ships for America Act and some of these other initiatives, but we really focused a lot on ship repair because that's probably as Franchetti talked about, that's the fastest way to get more players on the field, is can you repair the ships you have and increase their availability? Well, that's how you grow the fleet in the near term, because now you've got a higher number of ships that are actually able to deploy. And the U.S. Navy's ship repair processes are fairly broken. They don't work very well. The ship repair industry in the United States is operating kind of on a shoestring because they basically go from feast to famine. So they contract each of these ship repair periods individually. They compete for them and hopefully they win them, but if they don't, they end up not having any work for the next several months. So it's not a very good model. So the Navy has to come up with some ways to create a more sustainable ship demand or ship repair demand signal. So they have to come up with a way to contract for longer periods with a yard to do more repair periods over that time, and try to make it so that it's a more predictable demand that the ship repair companies can then build their infrastructure and workforce around, and then also plan better so they can reduce the likelihood of growth or increased costs. But in addition to that, the Navy can look at ways to work with allies. So you could see models where allied ship repair yards, like in Japan or Korea, might be able to do some voyage repair tasks that would reduce the need for longer repair periods back here in the United States. So you could split up an upcoming repair period, for example, between a foreign yard and then a U.S. repair yard that they're partnered with. So they can basically do that repair period over multiple visits, and the ship can be on deployment in between. So there's models where we can take advantage of overseas ship repair for the combatant ships. And then our non-combatant ships are combat logistics force ships, the maritime prepositioning force ships that are already deployed overseas. They can certainly take advantage of these overseas repair yards, and places like HD Hyundai and Hanwha in Korea have both made agreements with the United States Navy to repair these maritime sea lift command ships that are manned by civilian mariners overseas. So there are definitely opportunities to use these allied ship repair yards, which is important to getting them familiar with U.S. ships so that they can repair them in wartime if that becomes necessary. And then foreign shipbuilders can also be important to the U.S. Navy for building ships. One opportunity is the U.S. Navy is having to use a lot more what are called console tankers to support refueling needs in places like the Middle East. So the U.S. Navy's oilers are not able to cover down on all the demand for oilers around the world, and they're having to charter civilian ships and put on temporary equipment so they can refuel other ships. Those are called console tankers. But those tankers are rented from a commercial provider. Those ships could be built, more purpose-built by a foreign shipyard, like in Korea, for example. They could build these console tankers, sell them to a company that leases them to the U.S. Navy, and now the U.S. Navy's got access to a much greater capacity of oilers, which could be really useful in wartime.
I'm curious, since we're talking about allies and partners, how that these sort of relationships could be affected by an atmosphere of reciprocal tariffs, which is something that the White House has indicated that it plans on implementing soon.
Right. Yeah. So So here, one example of where allied shipyard could help out U.S. shipbuilding would be this modular shipbuilding idea. So you have modules or parts of ships getting built overseas at a shipyard that's good at building those modules. So HD Hyundai could build some modules for the next generation of oiler or cargo ship, or for some other U.S. Navy ships. But then would those modules have to be assigned tariffs as they come into the United States from Korea? And if that's true, well, that's going to impact the price of the ship, and it may make it so that it's really not economically worthwhile. So you'd need some kind of exclusion, at least for that, for government purchases of materials from an allied country. Same with things like steel and other machine parts that might be coming from an allied country. Now, the U.S. Navy builds ships, it has a Buy America provision in the NDAA normally that precludes buying a lot of stuff overseas, but there are parts that you have to buy overseas just because that's the place where they're built the best. And always from allied countries, so you wouldn't go to China or Russia to buy this stuff. But those are going to now experience tariffs, and then the question is, well, does that impact the price of ships? And now we have to worry about ship cost inflation due to tariffs, in addition to ship inflation that we're experiencing as a result of just general inflation in the economy. So there had to be some way to think about how do we exempt anything that's associated with shipbuilding from these tariffs.
Yeah. We have our final few minutes, and I want to spend that talking about what considerations the new Navy Secretary should be considering when he steps into the seat.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people will say, oh, he needs to focus on shipbuilding, but my argument would be, yeah, you should have somebody focusing on shipbuilding. But like I said, you're not going to be able to squeeze that many more ships out of the industrial base because we've put a lot of money into it already. There's a lot of demand already backed up. They have a backlog they have to work through. All the shipyards currently have a backlog to work through. So let the people that are trying to improve the process of shipbuilding focus on that. And the SECNAV needs to focus on what's the vision for the future Navy, because we don't have a CNO right now. And I don't know if the Navy uniform leadership has come up with a vision for that future fleet. They have a long-term effort looking at a hybrid fleet for the 20 years from now. But what's the fleet of like the next 10 years look like? And nobody's really putting that vision out there. And that's really essential if you want to drive the investment priorities that the Congress wants to pursue, and you want to be able to take advantage of this White House office's efforts. Well, you got to give them a target to point to. And I think the SECNAV is uniquely positioned right now to do that in a way that like John Lehman did back, now I guess 40 years ago. So I think that's probably the main goal, is which is normally not something the Secretary focuses on. Normally the Secretary focuses on things like acquisition and shipbuilding and those tasks. But I think in this particular era, given the administration's got a particular view on the future of warfighting, I think that the Secretary needs to provide that vision now for how do we evolve the fleet? How do we incorporate uncrewed systems into the fleet to grow it? How do we, do the best we can with our traditional ships that are getting built at some slow rate due to industrial base challenges? But fundamentally, how are you going to take advantage of new technologies to augment that traditional fleet rather than trying to grind away at that shipbuilding industrial base more? Because I think there's already a lot of efforts going on there. And the SecNav's attention is probably better paid to how do you evolve the fleet to address the near-term challenges the Navy faces.
Yeah. And what are you looking out for? I mean, we're in a new administration, the very beginning of one, so there's another 4 years ahead of us. But what are you tracking most closely for this year and going into 26?
Yeah, so I'm tracking a few things. So are they going to make significant procedural or regulatory changes inside the Navy and how they manage shipbuilding? So things like how you enforce technical standards, how are requirements being applied to ships? Are we going to revisit the requirements for existing ship classes to make them easier to manufacture? That's one thing. And then the separate thing would be how much money are they actually allocating towards new technologies like uncrewed systems, which really are mature enough to where we should be fielding them at scale now. And the Navy has just been very reticent to do that for a lot of reasons, partly lack of money, partly just a lack of initiative. And I think that's the thing where this new administration can really take hold of and move forward on pretty aggressively. And I think they will. But that's what I'll be looking for as a metric is, well, how much money is actually going to these new technologies relative to the old ship classes? And then what are they doing to really improve how we can, over the long term, build ships?
Yeah. And I guess additive manufacturing would maybe be a part of that.
Yeah, that's part of the new technologies, right? So I think, if you want to be able to build these uncrewed vehicles, uncrewed vessels at scale, you're going to have to tap into capabilities like on additive manufacturing, which you kind of let the companies do, right? So if you talk to Saronic, they're using additive manufacturing for different components. You talk to like General Atomics for air vehicles, they're using additive manufacturing to build a lot of these smaller new air vehicles. So those technologies are making their way in. And I don't think the Navy has to demand additive manufacturing. What the Navy needs to do is demand that these companies deliver the scale they need on the timing they need.
There's a lot to watch in this space. Brian, thank you so much for your insights. This wraps up our time for today. And to our audience, thank you so much for being here. I hope these discussions provided you with valuable insights into the Navy's evolving mission and future direction.
As we wrap up the first installment of our State of Defense series, focusing on the state of the Navy and the Marine Corps, I want to express my sincere gratitude to each of you for joining us today. Your engagement and your participation are crucial to the success of these discussions. Be sure to keep an eye on your inbox. We will be sending out the on-demand video link shortly. This will allow you to revisit key insights from today's conversation. And we invite you to keep the conversation going by sharing this information with your colleagues. By doing so, you can help foster an ongoing dialogue about the vital topics we discussed today. And together, we can delve deeper into the challenges and opportunities facing our military branches and the broader defense community. Don't forget, tune in next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern for the next installment of our State of Defense series. We'll focus on the state of the Air Force and Space Force. For Defense One, I'm Brad Peniston. Thank you for tuning in.